They say that destiny has a way of finding us when we least expect it, wrapped in the most unlikely of packages. I never believed such romantic notions until that cold November evening when everything I thought I knew about love, duty, and what truly matters in this world came crashing down around me like autumn leaves in a violent storm. My name is Edmund Blackwood, and at 26 years of age, I carry the weight of being heir to the Duke of Ravenshollow, one of England's most prestigious titles. Our estate sprawls across the rolling hills of Yorkshire, its ancient stone walls having witnessed centuries of political intrigue, grand celebrations, and countless arranged marriages designed to preserve wealth and status rather than nurture genuine affection. I had always assumed my fate would follow the same predictable path as my forebears, until she walked into our household and changed everything. The evening that would alter the course of my life began like any other in late autumn. A bitter wind rattled the diamond-paned windows of Ravenshollow Manor, and I stood in my study, watching servants scurry across the courtyard below, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The last stubborn leaves clung desperately to the oak trees that had stood sentinel over our family for 300 years, their golden and amber hues providing the only warmth in an increasingly gray landscape. I was reviewing correspondence when my father, the Duke, entered without ceremony. His presence filled the room with the same commanding authority that had intimidated Parliament members and foreign dignitaries for decades. At 62, Henry Blackwood remained an imposing figure, his silver hair perfectly groomed despite the late hour, his steel-gray eyes missing nothing. He cleared his throat in that particular way that always preceded announcements I wouldn't welcome. "Edmund," he began, settling into the leather chair across from my desk. "We need to discuss your future, specifically your marriage prospects." I set down my quill and gave him my full attention, though every instinct told me to prepare for battle. "I assumed we would have this conversation eventually, Father. Lord Pemberton has formally approached me regarding his daughter, Lady Cordelia," he continued, his tone suggesting the matter was already decided rather than merely proposed. "The union would be extraordinarily beneficial for both families. The Pemberton holdings adjacent to ours would create the largest consolidated estate in the north, and their political connections in London would prove invaluable." I had met Lady Cordelia Pemberton on several occasions during various social gatherings. She possessed the conventional beauty that society deemed appropriate for someone of her station, with perfectly arranged blonde curls, pale blue eyes, and porcelain skin that had never known a day of honest work. She spoke in carefully modulated tones about weather, fashion, and other safely mundane topics, never expressing an opinion that might be considered controversial or, heaven forbid, interesting. "And what of love, Father?" I asked, though I knew his response before the words left my lips. His laugh held no warmth. "Love is a luxury for poets and paupers, my boy. We have responsibilities that transcend personal sentiment. The Blackwood name, our tenants, our legacy. These things matter far more than romantic fantasies." As he spoke, a movement in the courtyard caught my attention. A young woman crossed the cobblestones carrying a basket of linens, her dark hair escaping from beneath a simple cap despite her obvious attempts to keep it properly contained. Even from this distance, I could see the distinctive scars that marked the left side of her face, a reminder of some tragedy that had clearly shaped her life in ways I could only imagine. Her name was Rosalind Fletcher, and she had joined our household staff 6 months earlier when our previous head housemaid departed to care for her aging mother. Mrs. Hartwell, our housekeeper, had recommended Rosalind despite the obvious questions her appearance might raise among guests. "She works harder than any 3 girls combined," Mrs. Hartwell had told my father during the hiring discussion I had inadvertently overheard. "And she has a way with the more delicate tasks that suggests proper training." What Mrs. Hartwell hadn't mentioned, but what I had observed during the months since Rosalind's arrival, was the grace with which she moved through her daily duties. There was something almost musical in the way she arranged flowers, folded linens, or tended to the smaller details that transformed a grand house into a welcoming home. She possessed an education that seemed incongruous with her position, occasionally referencing literature or historical events in conversations with other staff members, though she always caught herself and returned to more appropriate topics for someone of her station. "The engagement announcement will be made at the Harvest Masquerade Ball next month," my father continued, drawing my attention back to our conversation. "Lord Mortimer Ashworth, Cordelia's uncle, will be handling the arrangements. He's quite eager to see this union formalized." Lord Ashworth was a man I instinctively distrusted, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. Perhaps it was the calculating way his pale eyes assessed every room he entered, as if mentally cataloging items of value, or the manner in which he spoke to servants, with a casual cruelty that suggested he viewed them as less than human. He had appeared at several recent social gatherings, always positioned at Lord Pemberton's side, always whispering suggestions that seemed to benefit him more than anyone else involved. "You seem distracted, Edmund," my father observed, following my gaze toward the window where Rosalind had long since disappeared into the manor's depths. Merely contemplating the magnitude of the decision, I replied, which was true enough, though not in the way he assumed. After he left, I remained at the window long into the night, watching the last leaves finally surrender to the wind. The household gradually settled into the quiet rhythms of evening, but sleep eluded me. Something about the conversation, about the casual way my future had been decided without my input, sat heavily in my chest like a stone. Over the following days, I found myself paying closer attention to the life of our manor, particularly to those aspects I had previously taken for granted. I began noticing how Rosalind moved through her duties with quiet efficiency, how other staff members seemed to brighten in her presence, how she had a gentle word for everyone from the youngest scullery maid to our ancient groundskeeper. It was during one of these observations that I witnessed something that would haunt my thoughts for weeks to come. I had risen early to review estate ledgers in the library, enjoying the peaceful hours before the household fully awakened. As dawn painted the windows gold, I heard the soft whisper of fabric moving through the corridor outside. Curiosity compelled me to investigate, and I followed the sound through passages I rarely traversed, until I reached the abandoned east wing of the manor. This section had been closed for years, its grand ballroom gathering dust, while the family conducted social events in more modern spaces. The door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap, I glimpsed something that took my breath away. Rosalind stood in the center of the empty ballroom, her work dress replaced by something flowing and ethereal that caught the early morning light streaming through tall windows. She moved with a grace that transcended anything I had witnessed in London's finest ballrooms, her body flowing through dance steps with a passion and elegance that spoke of natural talent rather than expensive instruction. For several minutes, I watched in amazement as she danced alone, lost in music only she could hear. Her scarred face held no self-consciousness, only pure joy and freedom. In that moment, she wasn't a servant bound by social constraints, but simply a young woman celebrating the beauty of movement and expression. When she finally stopped, breathing softly from her exertions, I quietly retreated before she could discover my intrusion. But the image remained burned into my memory, challenging everything I thought I understood about beauty, worth, and what truly matters in another human being. The memory of that dawn dance haunted me through the following weeks, creating an awareness I couldn't shake. I found myself manufacturing reasons to visit areas of the manor where I might encounter Rosalind during her daily duties, though I was careful to make these encounters appear coincidental. The first such meeting occurred in the library 3 days later. I had genuinely come to retrieve a volume of poetry, but when I discovered Rosalind carefully dusting the higher shelves, I lingered longer than necessary. She worked methodically, treating each leather-bound tome with the reverence of someone who understood their value beyond mere decoration. When she noticed my presence, she immediately stepped down from her small ladder and offered a proper curtsy. "Good morning, my lord," she said softly, her voice carrying the faint traces of an accent I couldn't quite place. "I'll return later if you require privacy for your reading." "Please, don't let me interrupt your work," I replied, selecting a book at random. "I was merely seeking something to pass the time." She nodded and returned to her task, but I noticed her movements had become more self-conscious under my observation. It struck me how different this was from her uninhibited grace in the ballroom, and I felt a pang of guilt for having stolen that moment of pure freedom from her, even unknowingly. "You handle the books with great care," I commented, hoping to ease the tension my presence had created. A small smile touched her lips, transforming her face in a way that made the scars seem insignificant. "My mother taught me to respect books above almost everything else, my lord. She said they contained all the wisdom and beauty in the world, if one only knew how to look." "Your mother was educated then?" I asked, genuinely curious. "She served as governess to the Hartwell children before her marriage," Rosalind replied, then seemed to catch herself. "Forgive me, my lord. I shouldn't speak so freely about family matters. On the contrary, I find it refreshing to hear about someone who valued education regardless of their station," I said, and meant it. "Tell me, do you share her appreciation for literature?" The question clearly surprised her, and for a moment, her careful servant's mask slipped, revealing intelligence and passion beneath. "I do, my lord, though I have little time for such pursuits now." Our conversation was interrupted when Mrs. Hartwell appeared, her expression suggesting she found this interaction inappropriate. "Rosalind, you're needed in the kitchens immediately," she announced briskly. "Of course, Mrs. Hartwell," Rosalind replied, gathering her cleaning supplies quickly. As she passed me to leave, she murmured, "Good day, my lord," and I caught a hint of something floral in her scent, perhaps lavender from the soap she used. After she left, Mrs. Hartwell remained, her weathered face stern with disapproval. "If I may speak plainly, my lord, it wouldn't be wise to encourage familiarity with the staff. Gossip travels quickly in a household this size." Her warning was clear, and I knew she was right according to the conventions of our world. Yet something rebellious stirred within me, a growing conviction that these conventions might be fundamentally flawed. I was merely being courteous, Mrs. Hartwell. Of course, my lord, she replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Over the following days, I made a point of treating all staff members with the same courtesy I had shown Rosalind, hoping to deflect any particular attention from our interaction. But privately, I found myself thinking about her comments regarding literature and education, wondering what other depths lay hidden beneath the surface of her carefully maintained servant's demeanor. The next meaningful encounter occurred in the estate gardens a week later. November had painted the landscape in muted browns and grays, but the formal gardens retained their structured beauty even in dormancy. I was walking the paths, trying to clear my head of mounting pressure from my father regarding wedding preparations, when I discovered Rosalind kneeling beside the fountain that served as the garden's centerpiece. She had fashioned a small shelter from her shawl and was carefully tending to an injured bird, speaking to it in gentle tones as she offered it water from a small dish. The tenderness of the scene struck me profoundly. This young woman showing such compassion to a creature most people wouldn't have noticed. "Will it recover?" I asked softly, not wanting to startle either her or the bird. She looked up, clearly surprised to find me there. "I believe so, my lord. His wing appears strained rather than broken. Sometimes they just need warmth and shelter to heal." I knelt beside her, ignoring the impropriety of the action. The bird, a small sparrow, looked at us with bright, fearful eyes. "You have experience with injured animals?" "My family kept a small farm before." She paused, her hand unconsciously touching the scarred side of her face. "Before the fire. Animals were part of our daily life then." "The fire," I repeated gently, hoping she might share more of her story. She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't respond. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of old grief. "I was 12. A candle fell during a winter storm, and our cottage burned so quickly we barely escaped. My parents didn't." She stroked the bird's feathers with one finger. "I carry reminders of that night, but they've taught me that surviving something terrible doesn't make you less worthy of kindness." Her words hit me with unexpected force. Here was someone who had endured genuine tragedy, yet she spoke without self-pity or bitterness. Instead, she had transformed her pain into compassion for other vulnerable creatures. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, and the formal words felt inadequate for the depth of what she had shared. "It was long ago, my lord, and it led me here, to this position where I can contribute something useful." She carefully lifted the bird, preparing to move it to a safer location. Sometimes the path we don't choose proves to be exactly where we were meant to walk. As she stood to leave, I found myself unwilling to let the conversation end. "Rosalind," I called, using her name for the first time. She turned back, surprise evident in her expression. "If you ever need assistance with other injured creatures, please don't hesitate to ask. The estate has resources that might help." "That's very kind of you, my lord," she replied, and I detected genuine gratitude in her voice rather than mere politeness. That evening, I couldn't concentrate on dinner conversation as my father discussed details of the upcoming masquerade ball with Lord Ashworth, who had arrived unexpectedly and inserted himself into our meal with presumptuous familiarity. The man spoke of my engagement to Lady Cordelia as if it were a business transaction, which I supposed, in his mind, it was. "The announcement should come after the midnight unmasking," Lord Ashworth suggested, cutting his meat with aggressive precision. "Maximum dramatic impact for the assembled guests." "Excellent thinking," my father agreed. "Edmund, you'll need to ensure Lady Cordelia feels properly honored throughout the evening." I nodded absently, my thoughts still focused on the afternoon's encounter in the garden. The contrast between Rosalind's genuine warmth and depth, and the calculated nature of this arranged marriage discussion, couldn't have been more stark. How had I never noticed before how transactional my world had become, how removed from authentic human connection? "You seem distracted tonight, my lord," Lord Ashworth observed, his pale eyes studying me with uncomfortable intensity. "Surely you're not having second thoughts about this advantageous union?" "Of course not," I replied automatically, though something in his tone made me uneasy. "I was merely considering the preparations required." "Good," he said, and something in that single word sounded like a threat. "It would be most unfortunate if complications arose at this stage. The Pemberton family has invested considerable effort in this arrangement." Later that night, unable to sleep, I found myself walking the corridors of the manor. Without conscious decision, my steps led me toward the east wing, toward the abandoned ballroom where I had witnessed Rosalind's secret dance. The door stood closed now, and I almost turned away, but a faint sound from within stopped me. Music drifted through the heavy wood, not the orchestral arrangements typically heard at grand social events, but something simpler and more haunting. I pressed my ear to the door and realized someone was humming, the melody sweet and melancholy. I stood frozen outside that door, torn between respect for her privacy and an overwhelming desire to witness again the transformation I had seen before. The humming continued, joined now by the whisper of fabric moving in rhythm, and I knew she was dancing once more in her secret sanctuary. Unable to resist, I carefully pushed the door open just enough to see inside. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, casting silver patterns across the dusty floor where Rosalind moved like a spirit given form. She wore the same flowing garment as before, her hair loose around her shoulders, the scars on her face silvered by moonbeams rather than hidden by them. But tonight was different. Tonight, as she danced, I could see tears streaming down her cheeks, her movements expressing a profound sadness that spoke of dreams deferred and hopes that seemed forever out of reach. She danced as if her heart were breaking, and perhaps it was. Perhaps she understood, as I was beginning to, that the gulf between our worlds was unbridgeable, that whatever connection we had discovered in our brief conversations could never be more than stolen moments of conversation. I retreated before she could discover me, but sleep remained elusive for the rest of the night. Her image haunted me, the grace and passion she displayed when she thought herself unobserved, the depth of feeling she carried beneath her carefully composed exterior. How could my father speak of love as a luxury when it was clearly as essential to the human spirit as breathing? The next morning brought unwelcome news. Lady Cordelia and her entourage would be arriving a week early to assist with final preparations for the masquerade ball. My father announced this development with obvious satisfaction, viewing it as evidence of the Pemberton family's commitment to our union. I received the news with considerably less enthusiasm, understanding that it would mean a week of constant supervision and performance of the role of devoted fiancée. Lady Cordelia arrived with the pomp and ceremony befitting her station, accompanied by her personal maids, her companion Miss Fairfax, and of course, the ever-present Lord Ashworth. She greeted me with a perfectly calculated smile and a brief curtsy that managed to convey both respect for my position and confidence in her own considerable worth. "My Lord Edmund," she said in her precisely modulated voice. "How delightful to see you again. I do hope you've been well." "Quite well, Lady Cordelia," I replied, taking her gloved hand and bowing over it in the prescribed manner. "Welcome to Raven's Hollow Manor." She was, I had to admit, conventionally beautiful in the way that society prized. Her blonde hair was arranged in the latest fashion, her complexion was flawless, and her gown displayed the kind of expensive elegance that immediately communicated her family's wealth and status. Yet as I looked at her, I found myself thinking of dark hair escaping from a simple cap, of a face marked by tragedy but illuminated by compassion. Over the following days, Lady Cordelia made her presence felt throughout the manor. She critiqued everything from the flower arrangements to the menu planning with the casual authority of someone who expected to be mistress of the house. Her comments about the staff were particularly telling, delivered in tones that suggested she viewed them as interchangeable elements of the household machinery rather than as individuals with their own thoughts and feelings. It was during one such critique that she first noticed Rosalind. We were reviewing the arrangements for the masquerade ball when Rosalind entered to replace some wilted flowers with fresh ones from the greenhouse. Lady Cordelia's gaze fixed immediately on the scars marking Rosalind's face, and I saw her expression shift to one of barely concealed distaste. "My lord," she said after Rosalind had completed her task and departed. "Surely it would be more appropriate to have servants with such obvious disfigurements work in areas where guests are less likely to encounter them. The sight is rather disturbing." Her casual cruelty struck me like a physical blow. "Miss Fletcher is one of our most capable staff members," I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. "Her appearance has no bearing on her ability to perform her duties excellently." Lady Cordelia raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Of course, my lord, but surely you understand that when we are entertaining, we must consider the comfort of our guests. Some people find such sights quite unsettling." Lord Ashworth, who had been listening to our conversation with his usual calculating attention, leaned forward. Perhaps the girl might be better suited to kitchen duties during social events. Out of sight, so to speak. The suggestion was delivered with a smile, but I heard the underlying menace. This was a man who enjoyed wielding power over those who couldn't defend themselves, and the casual way he dismissed Rosalind's worth as a human being revealed everything I needed to know about his character. "The household staffing arrangements are quite adequate as they stand," I said firmly, making it clear the topic was closed. That evening, I sought solitude in the library, needing time away from the suffocating atmosphere that had descended over the manor with our guest's arrival. I was attempting to lose myself in a volume of Byron's poetry when Rosalind appeared in the doorway, carrying her cleaning supplies. "Forgive me, my lord," she said quietly. "I didn't realize you were here. I'll return later." "Please don't go," I said, perhaps more urgently than was appropriate. "I could use the company." She hesitated, clearly uncertain about the propriety of remaining, but something in my expression must have convinced her that I genuinely meant the invitation. She entered the room but remained standing near the door, as if ready to flee if necessary. "Are you finding the poetry enjoyable, my lord?" she asked, nodding toward the book in my hands. "Byron has a way of capturing the conflict between passion and duty that speaks to me," I replied. "Do you know his work?" Her face lit up with genuine enthusiasm before she caught herself and schooled her expression back to appropriate servant's reserve. "I've read some of his pieces, my lord. His writing about love and loss can be quite moving. What do you think of these lines?" I said, reading aloud. "She walks in beauty, like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes." As I read, I found myself looking at her rather than at the page, and I saw color rise in her cheeks as she understood the implicit message in my choice of passage. "It's beautiful, my lord," she said softly. "He sees beauty where others might not think to look." "Yes," I agreed, closing the book. "True beauty often exists in unexpected places, doesn't it?" Our eyes met across the room, and in that moment, the careful barriers we had maintained began to crumble. I saw recognition in her gaze, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been building between us despite all the reasons it should not exist. "My lord," she whispered, and I heard both longing and fear in her voice. I stood and moved toward her, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. "Rosalind, I—" The library door opened suddenly, and Mrs. Hartwell bustled in, stopping short when she saw us standing close together. Her expression immediately conveyed her disapproval and concern. "Begging your pardon, my lord," she said stiffly. "Rosalind, you're needed immediately in the kitchen." "Of course, Mrs. Hartwell," Rosalind replied, gathering her supplies with hands that trembled slightly. As she passed me to leave, she murmured so quietly only I could hear, "Be careful, my lord." After they left, I remained in the library, my heart racing with a combination of exhilaration and terror. The line had been crossed, the unspoken acknowledged. There could be no pretending anymore that what I felt for Rosalind was merely friendly interest in a servant's welfare. The realization that followed was even more devastating. In less than a week, I would be announcing my engagement to Lady Cordelia at the masquerade ball, effectively sealing my fate and ending any possibility of following my heart. The weight of duty and expectation pressed down on me like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe. But as I stood there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by books that spoke of love and passion and the courage to defy convention, a dangerous idea began to form in my mind. What if there was a way to give Rosalind one perfect evening? One night where she could be seen and appreciated for the remarkable woman she truly was, regardless of social barriers or physical imperfections. The masquerade ball, with its tradition of anonymity and hidden identities, might provide exactly such an opportunity. If I could arrange for her to attend in disguise, she could experience for a few precious hours what it felt like to be treated as an equal, to dance openly instead of alone in abandoned rooms. The plan was madness, of course, fraught with risks that could destroy us both if discovered. But as I considered the alternative, watching her fade back into invisibility while I bound myself to a life of hollow duty, the risk began to seem not only acceptable but necessary. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparations and mounting tension. I threw myself into finalizing arrangements for the masquerade ball while secretly working on my impossible plan. Through discreet inquiries with our seamstress, I arranged for an elegant gown to be created under the pretense of a gift for a distant cousin. The dress was crafted from midnight blue silk with silver embroidery that would catch the candlelight, designed to complement a woman of Rosalind's height and coloring. The most challenging aspect was finding the right moment to approach her with my proposal. Lady Cordelia's presence made private conversation nearly impossible, as she seemed determined to involve herself in every aspect of manor life. Lord Ashworth, meanwhile, watched everything with those calculating eyes, and I had the uncomfortable sensation that he suspected something, though I couldn't imagine what. My opportunity finally came on the afternoon before the ball. The house bustled with activity as final preparations commenced, and I discovered Rosalind in the conservatory, carefully arranging the exotic blooms that would decorate the ballroom. She worked alone, having volunteered for the task during the busiest part of the day when her absence from the main areas would go unnoticed. "They're beautiful," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and I saw exhaustion in her eyes along with something that looked like resignation. "Thank you, my lord. I wanted them to be perfect for your special evening." The reminder of what tomorrow night represented, the formal announcement of my engagement, created a sharp pain in my chest. "Rosalind, I need to speak with you about something important." She set down the flowers she had been arranging and gave me her full attention, though I could see wariness in her posture. "Tomorrow night at the masquerade ball, I want you to attend as my guest." The words hung in the air between us like an impossible dream. Her face went pale, then flushed, then pale again as the implications struck her. "My lord, that's not possible," she whispered. The impropriety. The scandal if anyone discovered. No one would know, I interrupted. That's the beauty of a masquerade. With the right gown and mask, you would be just another mysterious guest. You could experience one evening of being treated as you deserve, as an equal. She stared at me as if I had suggested we fly to the moon. And what purpose would such deception serve? Even if it were possible, which it isn't, what would be the point of one night of pretense? I moved closer, desperate to make her understand. Because you deserve to know what it feels like to be seen, truly seen, for the remarkable woman you are. Because I can't bear the thought of you spending another evening alone in that ballroom, dancing to music only you can hear. Her sharp intake of breath told me she understood the reference, that she knew I had witnessed her secret sanctuary. Color flooded her cheeks, and she looked away. You've been watching me, she said, and I couldn't tell if she was angry or embarrassed. I stumbled upon you by accident the first time, I admitted. But yes, I've returned since then, because seeing you dance, seeing the joy and freedom in your movements, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. My lord, this conversation is dangerous for both of us, she said, but I heard longing beneath her practical words. I have the gown already prepared, I pressed on, and a mask that will ensure your anonymity. Please, Rosalind, give me this one gift. Let me see you dance as you were meant to, surrounded by music and light instead of shadows. For a long moment, she said nothing, and I watched emotions play across her face like clouds passing over the sun. Fear, longing, desperation, and something that might have been hope. If we were discovered, she finally said, it wouldn't just be scandal. It would be ruin for both of us. I know the risks, I replied, but I also know that if I don't at least try to give you this, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. She was quiet for so long I thought she would refuse. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. One dance, she whispered. If I agree to this madness, I want one dance with you, where for a few minutes I can pretend that circumstances are different, that we exist in a world where such things are possible. More than one dance, if you'll have them. I promised, my heart racing with the enormity of what we were planning. Where would I dress? How would I arrive without being seen by the staff? I had already considered these practical details. There's a small chamber adjacent to the East Wing ballroom, accessible through the garden entrance. I'll have everything prepared there, and you can enter through the conservatory doors during the height of the festivities, when everyone's attention is focused on the main event. She nodded slowly, as if still not quite believing what she was agreeing to. And after? What happens when the evening ends and reality returns? The question hit me like a physical blow because I had no answer that wouldn't cause us both pain. I don't know, I admitted, but surely one perfect evening is worth whatever comes after. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Guests began arriving in the afternoon, their carriages creating a steady stream of activity in the courtyard. I moved through the required social interactions like an actor playing a role, greeting Lord Pemberton and his family, making appropriate conversation with various nobility, all while my thoughts remained focused on the evening ahead. Lady Cordelia seemed particularly animated, clearly relishing her role as the future mistress of Ravenshollow Manor. She had chosen an elaborate golden gown for the occasion, with a matching mask adorned with peacock feathers that proclaimed her status to anyone who might have doubted it. She attached herself to my arm with proprietorial confidence, making sure everyone understood her position. I can hardly contain my excitement for tonight's announcement, she confided as we watched the musicians setting up in the main ballroom. Uncle Mortimer says it will be the social event of the season. Lord Ashworth appeared at her elbow as if summoned by the mention of his name. Indeed, my dear niece, this evening marks the beginning of a very prosperous future for all concerned. As the sun set and the first guests began arriving in their elaborate costumes and masks, I excused myself to make final preparations. My hands shook slightly as I arranged the midnight blue gown and silver mask in the small chamber off the east wing, along with delicate slippers and long gloves that would complete the transformation. A note accompanied the ensemble. For one evening, be the princess you were always meant to be. By 9 o'clock, the masquerade ball was in full swing. The main ballroom glittered with hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off silk gowns and jeweled masks. An orchestra played from the gallery while costumed guests moved through elaborate dance formations, their identities hidden behind creative disguises ranging from exotic birds to mythological creatures. I wore a simple black domino mask with my formal evening wear, wanting nothing to distract from the moment I had been anticipating all day. Lady Cordelia remained close to my side, introducing me to various guests as if we were already married, while Lord Ashworth circulated through the crowd with the satisfied air of a man whose plans were proceeding perfectly. At 10:30, I finally managed to slip away from the main festivities, claiming a need for fresh air. Instead, I made my way to the East Wing ballroom, my heart pounding with anticipation and terror. The chamber where I had left the gown remained dark, and for a moment I feared Rosalind had changed her mind. Then the door opened, and she stepped into the moonlit ballroom, and the world stopped. The midnight blue gown transformed her completely, the silk flowing around her like liquid starlight. The silver mask covered the upper half of her face, concealing her scars while emphasizing the luminous beauty of her eyes. Her dark hair had been arranged in an elegant style with small silver pins that caught the light, and she moved with the same unconscious grace I had admired in secret, but now enhanced by the confidence that proper attire can provide. "You look," I began, then found myself unable to complete the sentence. "Like someone else entirely," she finished, her voice soft with wonder. "I hardly recognize myself." "You look like yourself," I corrected. "Like who you've always been inside, finally given the chance to shine. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like you had to hide your true self because of what others might think? Because tonight, that changes for both of us." I offered her my arm, and together we walked toward the sounds of music and laughter emanating from the main ballroom. With each step, I felt her tension ease slightly, the magical transformation of the evening beginning to work its spell on both of us. When we entered the grand ballroom, several heads turned to observe the mysterious woman in midnight blue. I heard whispered speculations about her identity, and felt a surge of fierce pride at the admiration I saw in the eyes of men who had no idea they were looking at a servant from their own social circle. "Shall we dance?" I asked, extending my hand. She took it without hesitation, and as we moved onto the dance floor, everything else faded away. The waltz that began was not just music, but magic itself, and Rosalind moved in my arms with the same ethereal grace I had witnessed in secret, but now enhanced by the joy of sharing it with someone who truly saw her. Other couples gradually stopped their own dancing to watch us, forming a circle around our movements. I heard murmurs of appreciation, comments about the mysterious lady's exceptional skill and elegance. For these precious minutes, she was not a scarred servant hiding in the shadows, but a radiant woman commanding the attention and respect of everyone present. "This is impossible," she whispered as we turned, her eyes bright with tears of joy behind her mask. "This is exactly as it should be," I replied, spinning her gently so that her silk skirts flared around her like liquid moonlight. The music ended to spontaneous applause, and several gentlemen approached to request introductions to my mysterious partner. I deflected their inquiries with good humor, claiming she was a distant relative visiting from abroad who preferred to maintain her anonymity. We danced 3 more times, each dance more perfect than the last, each moment stretching like spun gold in my memory. Between dances, I introduced her to various guests as Miss Rose, a name that made her smile behind her mask. She conversed intelligently about literature and music, her education finally given the chance to shine, and I watched several matrons revise their initial assessments of this unknown but clearly well-bred young lady. It was during our 4th dance that disaster struck. I had been so focused on Rosalind, so lost in the magic of the evening, that I failed to notice Lord Ashworth's growing interest in our mysterious guest. His pale eyes had been following our movements, and when the dance ended, he approached with predatory intent. "My Lord Edmund," he said with that oily smile I had come to despise, "surely you won't keep this lovely creature entirely to yourself. I insist on an introduction." Before I could deflect, he had positioned himself directly in front of Rosalind, his gaze studying her with uncomfortable intensity. "Madam, your dancing is quite extraordinary. Have we met before? There's something familiar about your bearing." I felt Rosalind tense beside me, but her voice remained steady as she replied, "I think not, sir. I would certainly remember such a meeting." But Ashworth's suspicions were clearly aroused. His eyes narrowed as he studied the line of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders, searching for clues to her identity. "Indeed, most intriguing. Tell me, from which family do you hail?" "From a family that values privacy, sir," I interjected, attempting to end the conversation. "Surely that's a gentleman's right at a masquerade." "Of course," Ashworth replied, but his tone suggested the matter was far from settled. "Perhaps you'll favor me with a dance, madam? I find myself quite curious about your background." "The lady has promised the next dance to me," I said firmly, offering Rosalind my arm. But as we moved away, I caught Ashworth's expression, and my blood chilled. He was no longer simply curious, he was hunting. Whatever he suspected, he would not let the matter rest. We had barely begun our 5th dance when catastrophe struck. The music stopped abruptly, and Lady Cordelia's voice rang out across the ballroom with crystalline clarity. "How fascinating to see such passion for dancing," she announced, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Perhaps our mysterious guest would honor us all by removing her mask? I'm certain we're all dying to know who has captured our host's attention so completely." The ballroom fell silent. This was not the scheduled unmasking, which traditionally occurred at midnight, but a direct challenge that could not be ignored without creating even more scandal. I felt Rosalind tremble beside me, and looked around desperately for an escape route. But we were surrounded by curious faces, all expecting compliance with Lady Cordelia's request. "Surely that can wait until the traditional midnight revelation," I said, attempting to buy time. "Oh, but I insist," Lady Cordelia replied, her smile sharp as a blade. "I have such a strong feeling we know this lovely creature." Lord Ashworth stepped forward, his satisfaction evident. "Indeed, I share my niece's curiosity. There's something remarkably familiar about the lady." The crowd began to murmur agreement, their excitement at the prospect of solving this mystery overriding any consideration of propriety. I realized with growing horror that we were trapped, that there was no way to avoid the exposure that would destroy us both. Rosalind looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw not fear for herself, but concern for what this revelation would cost me. In that moment, I understood what true courage looked like. "Very well," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "If you insist." With steady hands, she reached up and removed the silver mask, revealing her face to the assembled crowd. The scars that marked her left cheek seemed to glow in the candlelight, and I heard several sharp intakes of breath as recognition dawned. "A servant," someone whispered, and the word rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Lady Cordelia's triumph was absolute and vicious. "Why, it's one of your housemaids, my Lord Edmund. How wonderfully democratic of you to dance with the help." The cruelty in her voice, the casual way she reduced Rosalind to nothing more than an object of ridicule, ignited something fierce and protective within me. I looked around at the faces surrounding us, these people who claimed to represent the pinnacle of civilization while displaying the basest cruelty, and felt a clarity I had never experienced before. I moved to stand directly beside Rosalind, taking her hand in mine before the entire assembly. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "allow me to present Miss Rosalind Fletcher, one of the most remarkable women I have ever had the privilege to know." The shocked murmur that followed was nothing compared to the gasp that arose when I continued. "Miss Fletcher possesses more grace, intelligence, and genuine nobility than anyone in this room. Her worth is not determined by the circumstances of her birth or the scars she bears, but by the extraordinary kindness and strength of her character." "Edmund, what are you doing?" My father's voice boomed from across the room. "I'm telling the truth, father," I replied, never taking my eyes from Rosalind's face. "Something we seem to have forgotten how to do in our pursuit of social advantage." Lord Ashworth stepped forward, his face flushed with rage. "This is preposterous. You cannot seriously be suggesting that a scarred servant is worthy of such attention. I'm suggesting that true beauty and worth have nothing to do with the superficial qualities this gathering seems to prize above all else." I shot back. "Miss Fletcher has shown me what genuine nobility looks like, and it bears no resemblance to the calculated cruelty I've witnessed here tonight." The ballroom erupted in shocked conversation, but I no longer cared about their opinions or their scandalized whispers. I turned to Rosalind, who stood with tears streaming down her face, her dignity intact despite the humiliation being heaped upon her.
"I'm sorry," he whispered.
"I never meant for it to end this way." "No," she replied softly. "This is exactly how it needed to end, with the truth finally spoken." What happened next surprised everyone, myself included. My father, who I expected to be apoplectic with rage, approached us with an expression I couldn't read. He looked at Rosalind for a long moment, then at me, then back at her. "Miss Fletcher," he said quietly, "would you mind taking a walk with me?" 3 months later, on a crisp February morning that painted the estate grounds in shades of silver and gold, I stood at the altar of our private chapel watching Rosalind walk toward me in a gown of ivory silk that seemed to capture all the light in the room. The scandal of that masquerade ball had indeed rocked our social circle, but the aftermath proved surprising. My father, after his private conversation with Rosalind that night, had emerged with a new understanding of what truly mattered. Lord Ashworth's financial manipulations had been exposed by investigative work that my father commissioned, leading to his disgrace and departure from our county. Lady Cordelia, faced with the truth about her uncle's schemes, had quickly found alternative marriage prospects among men whose characters better matched her own. "Where are you watching from?" I'd love to hear from viewers around the world who believe, like I learned to believe, that love sees past society's shallow judgments. As I watch Rosalind approach, radiant with joy and confidence that no longer needs to hide behind masks or shadows, I think about the lesson this journey has taught me. True nobility isn't inherited through bloodlines or purchased with gold. It's earned through acts of kindness, courage in the face of adversity, and the strength to love authentically despite society's expectations. The woman who reaches for my hand at the altar is not the scarred servant who once danced alone in abandoned ballrooms. Nor is she the mysterious lady who captivated a crowd of nobility with her grace. She is simply Rosalind, extraordinary in her ordinary humanity, perfect in her imperfections, and more beautiful than any treasure my family's wealth could ever purchase. Our story began with duty and expectation, with the weight of tradition and the fear of stepping outside prescribed roles. But it ends with the understanding that the greatest treasures in life cannot be arranged by others or demanded by society. They must be chosen freely, pursued bravely, and protected fiercely against those who would diminish their worth. As we speak our vows in the presence of those who truly matter, I realize that this is not an ending at all, but the beginning of a life lived authentically, guided by love rather than duty, by truth rather than convenience. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the courage to see beyond the surface, to recognize worth where others see only scars, and to dance together regardless of who is watching. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to hear more tales of love that transcends all boundaries. Because in the end, isn't that what we're all searching for? Someone who sees us completely and loves us anyway. Someone who makes us brave enough to remove our masks and dance in the light.